949 this morning, and I'm in the studio with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick.
Great to have you here again this morning, Dr. John. And of course, you're answering people's questions. They text them through to our text line, which is 0401 949 949. And we had a question that came in prior to this week in regards to angels, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I saw something in the media this week which I thought was quite interesting, Dr. John. It was a bunch of geobiologists at the University of Colorado in Boulder. They've done a whole lot of research, and they say, and this is interesting, that the Earth could have once been a water world covered by a global ocean, their study suggests.
Isn't that interesting?
It is, isn't it?
And look, I mean, obviously we know that it once was that. You know, I think you mentioned that their time frame was a little bit longer than ours. I think theirs was about 3 billion years or so, whereas our time frame would only be about 4,500. But it's interesting that they come up with that sort of thing, because quite clearly the world was covered with water, and it was the great global flood of Noah.
Yes.
But you see, really in theory, the Earth shouldn't have any water on it at all. Certainly in their time frame several billion years ago, because according to their belief, if the Big Bang were true, then the Earth would have been far too hot to have any liquid water on it.
Yes.
In fact, I mean, it's still molten and hot right in the middle of it now, and it's only really cooled on the outside. So really, if the Big Bang were true, then water couldn't have been on Earth in the beginning. And they're saying that 3 billion years ago it's covered in a global ocean.
Yes, well, interesting how they talk about, all the different scientific methods they use to, test whether water was actually in the rock. They don't really talk about their timing, though. No, there's not a lot of info there as to how they came up with their years or ages, which I sort of expected when I read this story.
I think that would be somewhat guesswork.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Dr. John, we had a question that came in, and it was in regards to a statement that you'd made that angels have no free will. And the person who sent the question in said, could you please explain that, and when angels fell with Satan?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, isn't it? And it's certainly one that caused me to have quite a think during the week. And I did say that angels don't seem to have, or don't have, free will, and that people do. And I had to have a think about that, because it is pretty clear, I think, that human beings do have free will. Now, the Bible tells us that Adam was made in the image of God. Now, obviously, God has free will, but Adam was made in the image of God. And I had to think about that too. What does that really mean, Adam being made in the image of God? And I thought that probably also was the reason why Eve was created. And that's a very interesting concept, because what we know about God is that God is love. And love really has a need to express itself in some way, and we believe that's the reason why God created when he created in the first place. Yep. But we believe also that God is a tripart being. He's Father, Son and Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And it's been suggested that because his nature is love, the fact that he's a tripartite being enabled love to express itself, the interactions between Father, Son and Holy Spirit, the three personas, if you like, in the Godhead. But then God made Adam in his image, and really, if Adam was made in the image of God, he had to also be a love being, and he needed a way to express his love.
Yes.
Now, we read what God did first, that he brought the animals to him, because remember, God said it's not good for man to be alone. Now, obviously it wasn't good for man to be alone, because he's a love being and he needs a way to express that love. So God brought the animals to him for him to name them, but the Bible tells us that there wasn't found a helper suitable for him. Therefore, God put him to sleep, and he created Eve out of Adam's body. He used one of his ribs. And Adam then realised that she was the perfect companion. So they were then both able to mutually express their nature, which was love, because they were created in the image of God. And clearly also they were created with free will. God said, you can eat of any tree in the garden except one, and eating of that one would produce death. And we know that Satan deceived Eve, and of course the rest is history. But they obviously did have free will to do that.
Yep.
And we see later, even in Deuteronomy, that the Israelites had free will. God said, behold, I've set before you today life and death. Therefore, you choose life if you're smart. So we obviously do have free will. But what about the angels? Now, we don't know much about their creation or when they were created. They're spirit beings and they exist in a different dimension to us.
Okay, well, let's hear more about that very shortly. It's 8:15. We'll have Anthony Evans coming up in a moment and back with Dr. John very shortly. If you have any questions for Dr. John, send them through to the text line 0401 949 949. I'm with Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Dr. John can answer your questions. Just send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, you've been speaking about free will and how, of course, us humans, we have free will, but what about the angels?
Yes, well, that's the interesting thing, and we don't know a lot about the creation of the angels. We know that they are spirit beings, and so they live in a different dimension to us. They live in the spirit dimension, whereas we're in the physical dimension. And so in the dimension of the angelic realm, there is no time. There's only time in our material dimension, and that's because time is measured by the rotation of the sun and the moon and the planets and all of the things that are part of our physical world, and the motion of the heavenly bodies around one another. So we don't know when the angels were created, and that would have been outside of time anyway. We don't know. Did it happen in the spiritual dimension sort of at the same time as the physical dimension was created? We don't know that, and it's pretty hard to comprehend how you can relate the two, one outside of time and one inside of time. But the word angel means messenger, and that seems to be their role throughout the scriptures. They're sent out for a specific purpose. And we get the impression from the book of Hebrews that their job is to serve humanity, and it may even be to be protective of humanity. I mean, that might be where the concept of guardian angels came from.
Yes.
Because Psalm 91 says, he will set his angels charge over you to guard you in all your ways. They'll bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. So there does seem to be a role of protection of humanity and service of humanity for the angels. Now, we also find from Scripture that there seems to have been an angelic rebellion. Now, it's possible that they refused to take the position of servants to humanity, some of them anyway, the ones that followed Satan. The Bible doesn't say. But there is a very interesting verse in the letter of Jude. If we have a look at that, we see that verse 6 speaks of the angels who didn't keep their proper domain being kept in darkness and chains for judgment day. Now, who are those angels? Right? I mean, we believe that evil spirits are around now, so who are those angels that are kept in chains for judgment day? Well, it might be, the Bible doesn't clearly say, but it could be that they are the ones who cohabited with women before the flood and produced progeny out of those women.
Yes.
So they must have been able to have some sort of physical presence to do that, and presumably they all perished in the flood, but as spirit beings, they're locked up in chains waiting for Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to be very interesting to find that out. I don't pretend to know exactly what that verse means, but it is a very, very interesting verse. But the rest of the angelic, the fallen angels, we presume, are the evil and demonic spirits which influence us in the present time under the rulership of Satan. Now, how that works, I don't think we really know. But there is certainly something between there's a difference between the rebellion of the demonic world and the rebellion of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve and their descendants, like us, we have been given a second chance at returning to our originally perfect state. Okay? It seems that if we put our faith and trust in Jesus, we can inherit that perfect state in the next life. Satan and the demons don't seem to have had a second chance. You know, that was the end for them. And I think that's got something to do with us being given freedom of choice and making the wrong decision. But I don't think the freedom of choice was given to the angelic realm, so that their rebellion is final. They don't get a chance at repenting or whatever. And I know that's a bit speculative, but it does seem to make some sort of sense. And I think that explains why we can say that the angels do not have freedom of choice. They have to do what they're told. They rebelled against that, some of them, and they don't get a second chance.
Wow. You're on 94.9 this morning. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. And, of course, Dr. John has an awesome resource behind him, and that is creation.com. It's a website that has thousands and thousands of pages of information, well worth reading. Some of the stuff on there is absolutely brilliant, and Dr. John can answer all your questions on air as well. If you do have a question, you don't have to go to creation.com. Of course, you can send the question to us, because chances are if you have a question, somebody else will have the same question. Send those questions through to our text line 0401 949 949, and we can answer them on air for you. You are on 94.9. Good morning. And I'm with Dr. John in the studio. Dr. John's from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions that come through to our text line. If you have any questions, simply text 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, Isaiah 43:1 says, "Don't fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." God actually commands us not to fear or worry. The phrase "fear not" is used at least 80 times in the Bible, most likely because he knows the enemy uses fear to decrease our hope and limit our victories. And one thing that is creating fear worldwide at the moment, and certainly been in the media over the last week, in fact, it's prolific. There's so much of it in the media, it is totally freaking some people out. That is the coronavirus. You're a doctor. You know a lot about coronavirus. I've got a few questions for you, and I wonder if you can help me with some of the questions on coronavirus. Antibiotics, what do they do?
Oh, they don't do anything against viruses, Mick. If you get the virus, and if you get a bacterial infection on top of the viral infection, then the antibiotics may have some effect, but they certainly don't. They're not effective against viruses. But you're quite right. The media is absolutely full of it at the moment, and it is instilling fear into enormous swathes of the population. And again, you read from Isaiah, but any people who are fearful who are Christians should read Psalm 91 as well. That's the most important psalm to give you a real hope of protection from any of these infections like coronavirus. But look, it's obviously a problem. I mean, it's very, very contagious. I mean, we saw what happened in China, but the classic example of contagion was the Diamond Princess cruise ship.
Yeah.
I mean, one person who travelled on the ship and who had a short cruise and got off in Hong Kong and didn't have any symptoms, only got it later, right, has then infected about 800 people on that cruise ship.
Yeah.
Now that's about 25% of the ship's company, both passengers and crew, and the passengers were locked up in their cabins.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the ship was the absolute perfect incubator. And, even the 170 Australians who got transferred off the ship to Darwin,
Yep.
they didn't have any symptoms when they came off the ship, but several of them developed symptoms while they were in quarantine, and one of those people has died. So, I mean, really it is a terrible tragedy, and what an awful mistake it was to confine the people on that ship.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they didn't know, but really that has been a good lesson in don't lock people up in a confined space like that. And even though most people who get infected have got relatively mild symptoms and recover fully, the impact on the whole world already is enormous. So how do we explain viruses and within the framework of an originally perfect world when it was created? What are they here for, and why do they do the damage that they do?
Yeah.
And of course it isn't just coronavirus. I mean, we've got things like Ebola, HIV, HPV, smallpox, many others. So what's the explanation in a world that we say was originally perfect when it was created? Well, we know that is true because Genesis 1:31 says that the world was perfect when it was created. But the next few chapters explain what happened. Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, sin entered the world, and the whole creation was corrupted. And we see that on a huge scale with human and animal behaviour. And but what about on the microscopic level, the level that we can't actually see?
Yes.
Well, I believe that everything in the original creation was meant to be symbiotic. I mean, we still have a lot of symbiosis around in the world at the present time.
Yep.
But if it was all symbiotic, then all forms of life, including the microorganisms, existed in a state that was mutually beneficial. Now, we still see that on a large scale. We see things corrupted, but there's so much beauty, care, nurture and love in the human and animal kingdoms and in nature itself.
Yep.
And the same goes for the microscopic kingdom. Yes, we have got pathogenic bacteria, but most of the bacteria in our systems are beneficial. And the bacteria on our skin keep it healthy. Only occasionally do they get out of their proper relationship and we get things like acne and boils and other skin infections. The bacteria in our intestines are beneficial. Only occasionally do they get out of kilter and we get things like gastroenteritis and other gut upsets. So generally speaking, everything works pretty well and only occasionally gets out of sync. Now, the same goes for viruses. If we think about viruses and bacteria, there are more bacteria in our bodies than we have cells. There's an enormous number.
Wow.
And there are more viruses than there are bacteria.
I feel all weird now.
Yeah, but most of them are helpful. They're beneficial to us. The big difference, of course, between bacteria and viruses is that bacteria or bacterial cells are complete cells. Bacteria are able to reproduce themselves. Viruses are not like that. They're not fully cellular and they can't reproduce themselves. They have to use the machinery that's built into our cells to reproduce themselves. So they're a little bit different from bacteria.
Wow. So more of me isn't me than me. That's pretty freaky. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. If you have any questions, send them through to the text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we're talking about the coronavirus, and we just had a question come in. There was an article about a man in China treating himself with honey because of coronavirus. Does or would Manuka honey have an effect on viruses and bacteria?
Well, that's a question I definitely don't know the answer to,
Okay.
Nick, and I'm sure it'd be worth a try, and I suppose that's going to strip all the supermarket shelves of Manuka honey if it works. But look, all of that's pretty speculative, I think, and what we need to realise is that most of what we're seeing is really part of the fall. We've said how there was this symbiotic relationship between bacteria and viruses and ourselves. And that's how we were designed, but it's all gone haywire because of the fall of Adam and Eve. What that did was allow corruption to enter the world, and that enabled a lot of viruses to become pathogenic when they mutate. And some of them are able to move from an animal species where they don't do any harm to humans where they do harm. And we've seen that sort of thing with bird flu and swine flu. And I think it was suggested originally that even HIV might have done that by transferring from a monkey species to man. And we've all read that this COVID-19 coronavirus might have done the same. It might have come from bats. And we know that we can get lyssavirus, which is like rabies, from bats, but it doesn't seem to do any harm to the bats. So once it jumps from one species to another, it really does seem to do harm. A lot of the influenza viruses seem to come from birds like ducks, and they do great harm to us, but they don't seem to do much harm to the ducks. And one of the worst influenza viruses that we've ever seen was in 1917. They had the Spanish flu, and that supposedly killed more people than the Great War itself. And that was a terrible bloodbath.
Now, was that just a virus as well?
Spanish influenza, a type of influenza virus. And interestingly, that seems to have burnt itself out because it's obviously mutated and lost a lot of its potency, so it doesn't seem to be around anymore.
Is it similar to the coronavirus in any way?
Influenza viruses, the cold viruses are coronaviruses. The influenza viruses are a bit different. But viruses are viruses, and there are plenty of them around, and they really only cause trouble when they've mutated and they're harmful. One of the reasons why it's very difficult to produce flu vaccines is because you can produce a vaccine against a lot of different strains of flu, but you might not have produced it against the one that then becomes the major strain for that particular season. So it doesn't work quite as well. But look, what we're talking about is really the fall of man, the entry of sin, and the consequences of it. And death, of course, is the most obvious one of those, but we tend to accept it as simply part of life because that's all that we know. We don't appreciate the enormity of sin and how horrible it is from God's perspective. Every bad thing that we observe in the world, including coronavirus and all the other infections, they're all a consequence of sin. And we can say the same for the bushfires, the floods, whatever climate changes that might be caused by man. These are all consequences of sin. And the good news from our point of view as Christians is that God is not going to allow any corruption whatsoever to enter into him, into the kingdom that he's going to newly create. In fact, nothing corrupt can enter it, and that means that the only perfect individual who's going to enter was Jesus. And if we're included in him, we're going to enter as well. And this is why one of the reasons why the gospel it's so important to understand the gospel. I mean, so many people think that if there's an afterlife, if they're good enough, they're going to make it. No, you can't be good enough. Only Jesus was good enough, and you're not going to make it unless you're included in him, because you can't overcome your own sin. Only Jesus was able to do this. So all of these issues like aging, disease, death, they should help us look at the awfulness of sin and realise just how terrible it is from God's perspective. You know, from our perspective, we tend to gloss over it a bit, but we really need to see just how terrible our sin is and what it did. It sent the Son of God to the cross on our behalf. So really, I don't think we should be minimising our sin in any way and recognising that all of these problems are the consequences of it.
Wow. Wow, it's interesting. Over the last couple of years, you've talked a lot, Dr. John, about everything loses information. DNA loses information over the generations. And we're not just seeing that with humans, it's with animals and even viruses. They're changing in similar ways. And that's pretty much because of sin. Prior to that, they wouldn't have changed. They would have kept that information. Then sin comes in and all of a sudden these little bits of code start falling apart, like a computer program becoming corrupted. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Everything deteriorates with time. You know, nothing gets better in time with time, bacteria and viruses don't improve when they mutate. They change and they cause worse effects sometimes, but it doesn't actually improve them. And we think that's because, the world seems to think it's because they're evolving and getting tougher. No, they're devolving, they're getting weaker, but they still cause terrible effects.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what an awesome morning, Dr. John. Thank you so much again. And, of course, thank you guys who have been sending these questions in. It is sensational that we're getting so many questions. If you do have any questions for Dr. John, please send them through, because we can certainly, I can send them to Dr. John anytime and we can answer those questions on air. Simply send them to our text line, 0401 949 949.